Hello, my wide open-minded friends. Welcome to the WOW Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Cook. This is the debut episode. I'm thrilled that you're here. I want to say hi to everyone watching on YouTube and hello to everyone who's just listening to the audio version and remind you both that the other one should always be available. In fact, this first episode actually includes a lot of different people, so you might want to watch it on YouTube if you can, just to put faces with the voices. But don't worry, for those of you just listening, I'll let you know who's talking and let you know what order they appear in. So quickly, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Katie Cook. I've been a television host for almost 2 decades now on CMT, Country Music Television. Music is a huge part of my life. In fact, I am a musician as well, been raised in the music business, and I have a duo with my husband called Suncat, and my husband's name is Adam Schoenfeld. Hopefully you'll check out Suncat at some point. So music, a big part of my life always, but the paranormal has been a big part of my life as well. This is definitely personal for me. I've had a lot of unusual experiences over the years, and I'm looking for answers, and I know you are too. That's why you're here, I'm sure. And Wide Open Wonders, my reason for calling it Wide Open Wonders is because I want to cover all topics paranormal. It's all close to my heart. Ufology probably closest to my heart, and I do include that under the paranormal term, by the way. But yeah, this is personal for me, and I want to find answers, and hopefully you'll join me along the way. I hope you'll consider subscribing if you enjoy it, and please tell your friends. That would be great. Let's talk about what's in this actual episode. Many of you are card-carrying MUFON members. Many of you have heard of MUFON, but you don't know exactly what it is. Some of you really don't even know what the heck I'm talking about, but we're going to change that today. MUFON stands for Mutual UFO Network, and they are celebrating 50 years, if you can believe it. It started with just a small group in the Midwest and then really grew globally. And they're really there to support experiencers, to do the research, to gather data from all over the world. And I had the chance recently to catch up with some of the top people at MUFON to talk about where it's been, where it's headed, and why it's so important that we continue to support them. I'll tell you, when I was a teenager and first really getting into ufology, again, because of some personal experiences, I was just devouring books, but I felt pretty alone. I would say I was a little closeted with my ufology interest. I had a few friends I could talk to, but for the most part, I really kept it to myself. And MUFON, although I didn't even know that much about them then, they were just this beacon. The fact that I knew a group of people had gathered to learn more about UFOs and alien contact just made me feel less alone. So I really wanted to give something back to them in this first episode and just talk about how important their role is. And I also wanted to honor the late, great Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist turned UFO researcher and investigator. We owe so much to Stanton. It's hard to know even where to start. I had the opportunity to talk to some people that were very close to Stanton. So the second half of this episode is really going to be dedicated to honoring him. You're also going to see some artwork in the background if you're watching on YouTube in a few of these shots, and I'm going to list the artist's name on the screen. And I want to give a special shout out to Liz Alpert. I've got a couple of her paintings up there, but also I'm wearing one of her pieces of jewelry that I absolutely love. So again, if you're interested in that artwork, I will put the name up for you and you can go check them out. But let's start with MUFON. In order of appearance, Executive Director for MUFON, Jan Harzan, who was previously with IBM for 37 years before coming over full-time to MUFON. He has an interesting story about a childhood encounter that got him interested in all of this. Founding member and current board member, John Schuessler. Really cool to catch up with him. He's one of the guys that literally started MUFON. Author, researcher, lecturer, and director of MUFON's Experiencer Research, Kathleen Marden. Author, researcher, and lecturer, also MUFON's Investigator of the Year, Angelia Sheer. MUFON board member and field investigator, Bill Crowley. And doctor, author, and director of the award-winning Phoenix Lights documentary, Dr. Lynne Kitei. Please enjoy this closer look at MUFON. It starts with Jan Harzan.
My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the Executive Director for the Mutual U.F.O Network. I've been involved with MUFON for over 25 years as a volunteer and a field investigator, and I got involved as a state section director in California, and then became on the board of MUFON, and then eventually, when I retired from IBM, they asked if I would not mind, but if I would run the organization. And I said, absolutely, much to my wife's chagrin. So here I am.
I've seen her running around in the halls. She's got your back on this, although I'm sure it's a big shift for her from previous life. So this interest in UFOs, ufology, aliens, this goes back really to your childhood. In fact, you have a pretty interesting story with your brother, I believe.
Exactly. You know, back in the day, I won't say how long ago, but it was back in those 50s and 60s. This was all over the news. I mean, UFOs, they were called flying saucers back then. Front page news. And my brother and I read some of these articles and things, and we had determined that these craft must be using some kind of electromagnetic propulsion system. So we designed a 30-foot craft with 3 pulsed electromagnetic engines. Now, mind, we're like 8 or 9 years old at this time. And we said, well, we're going to build one of these things, you know, in our backyard. And so my mom took us to the store one day to go shopping with her. We went to the magazine rack while she was doing the grocery shopping. And there was this magazine there called Flying Saucer Review from England, half-size magazine. And in it, when we took it home and read it, it said, these flying saucers are seen around military installations, nuclear power plants, and places where anti-gravity research is being done. So we looked at each other and said, well, we're doing anti-gravity research. Maybe you want to come visit us. So there seems to be a consciousness connection here, because within the month, this thing shows up in our backyard. And so what happened was my brother came into my bedroom on a Saturday morning at 6:20, 30-ish type and said, hey, there's somebody trying to break into my room. I said, what do you mean there's someone trying to break into my room? Well, they're playing with the screen. I said, well, did you look out your window to see who it was? He said, no, I didn't do that. So I said, well, let's go down and take a look. Now, this was...
Well, that was very brave of you.
Well, I'm thinking, I don't know. My brother used to pull tricks on me, and I'm thinking he's just, giving me trying to get me excited here about something. So I said, let's go down and take a look. There's nothing there. That was the windows, shades were drawn and everything, but we didn't hear any commotion or anything. So I said, well, let's go out in the backyard and see. We'll go out, look down the house and see who's back there. So this is in April 1965, right before the time change, and it's very bright outside. The sun's already up over the horizon, so it's a daytime sighting. As we're walking through the kitchen to go into the garage, to go out the back door, I look at the clock and it says 6:30. So that's how I know what time it was. It was 6:30. Walk to the end of the house, look back down towards his window, there's nothing there. And I'm thinking, okay, you got me. You got me out of bed 6:30 in the morning to make a big prank here. So we turn around and go back in the house, and bam, right in front of our faces, 30 feet from us, is a craft hovering 10 feet off the ground with 4 landing gear. It was like a brick. If you blew it up to 8 feet, 10 feet long, by 4 feet wide, by 3 feet high, completely smoothed the sides and painted it bright orange with 4 corrugated, like a dryer hose, landing gear coming out of it and down, and black suction cups on the bottom and brown crossbars. And the crossbars had a bolt in the center. So I'm looking at this thing. First reaction is, oh my God, these things are real. It's right in front of my face, right? Second thing I thought was, wow, it looks like looks like it's man-made. Why did I think that? Because I saw that bolt where the scissoring function was on the landing gear as they would go up and down. But then I studied it a little closer, and I thought, wow, it's awfully small. These people would have to, anyone inside that thing would have to be very tiny because it's only 3 feet tall. And then I thought, wow, there's no windows and no doors. Nothing on the craft is completely solid. And then I thought, it's completely seamless. There's no rivets and no bolts. Well, back in 1965, you didn't have the ability to build something like that out of metal without having a seam in it or something, right? You just couldn't bend the metal like that. So there's some kind of material sciences that we don't quite understand yet. But so I'm staring at this thing, and I said to my brother, I'm going to go get a camera. So I run into that garage to go into the house. We've locked ourselves out. And I'm again pounding on the door because no one's up in the house trying to wake someone up.
Now, would that be normal for the doors to lock behind you like that?
No.
Okay.
It wouldn't be normal for the doors to lock behind you. Exactly. Okay. I didn't think about that until years later. But pounding on the door, and all of a sudden I noticed a discontinuity in my knock, like a knock like that. And then all of a sudden, 2 more knocks later, it opens, and my older brother's standing there. It's like, what's going on? It's nothing. I didn't want to stop and tell him because I wanted to get the camera. Got the camera, got back outside. My brother, Jeff, is standing on the swing set looking out to the west. The craft's gone. And I said, and it's literally, in my mind, it's been about 30 seconds. I said, what happened? He said, well, it was just hovering there like frozen. It literally was frozen in the sky. It was the weirdest thing. It was just frozen. It was making a humming noise like a transformer on a telephone pole. Okay. And he said it started to slowly drift to the west, and it just shot off over the horizon, just shot off. So we're looking at each other like, okay, now what do we do? Like, who's going to believe? I mean, I'm 10, he's 9. No one's going to believe us. So we didn't say anything to anybody. I went to school on Monday morning, and I talked to my best friend Tom, who later became a lawyer and is now retired. And I said, Tom, you won't believe what happened. I went out on the playground in 5th grade. Tom, you won't believe what happened. I told the whole story that I just went through here, maybe a little more detail. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and so I pause from my talking. And he wait for him to say something. And he says, "Do you want to go play baseball?"
Oh.
That was his answer. "Do you want to go play baseball?" And I'm thinking to myself, did you just hear what I just told you the most fantastic story in the world, and you don't even pay any attention to it? It goes right over your head. So at that moment, I knew you could not talk to people about this subject. And I stopped talking about it for like 20 years. I just didn't talk to anyone about it. It was like,
but your brother, at least, thank God you saw it together.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise,
absolutely.
you might have talked yourself out of it.
No, I would never have talked myself out of it because it was too daylight, too lucid. This was no dream concept. This is absolutely there in front of your face. So I would have, but it would have been harder to go talk to people about it because they might have talked me out of it. Having a second witness is a huge thing.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's everything.
And then one day I had an experience that said to myself, "Why are you not sharing this information with people?" And it dawned on me, there are millions of people out there who've had similar experiences or even better experiences than I've had, and they're holding on to it because it's not safe to talk about it. I said, we need to make it safe for people to have this conversation. And that's when I got involved with MUFON and started doing what I do, because I think there needs to be a conversation on the planet about this stuff. We need to make it safe for our scientists and engineers to study this, our psychologists, our sociologists, because if we do, we have huge breakthroughs for us as a human race.
You are, of course, a founding member of MUFON, and you're still on the board. I want to go back to where this interest came from for you. What was that thing that sparked this up in you?
I had more than one spark. I'm in the engineering field and was my whole life. And in that, we used to avoid UFOs, but I was a rebel. And I was a rebel because when I was in the 8th grade, 1948, I was with my parents and we saw a huge glowing object from our car, pass our car and make a right-hand turn. And we knew that was nothing that anybody else had, especially in 1948. And so I told, on and on, I told my parents, I'm getting more involved. I'm seeing more people that are talking about this. And when I went to college, I kind of forgot it all for a while. And then I joined the military as a reservist, and then jumped into the space business. And in the space business, there were people there that reported UFOs. And so I said, now the credibility factor has jumped up a bit. And so I feel more brave at this point to go ahead and speak out. And that was, golly, 1960s.
And that took a lot of bravery, because it still takes bravery even today in 2019 for people to come out and say, I'm interested in this.
Everybody says it now. But then very few people did. In fact, in a lot of companies, if you said it, you were out, Don't embarrass us,
I mean, we think there's still a bit of a stigma today, but you're saying nothing compared to what you experienced.
Yeah. I don't see much stigma today. I mean, smart people are involved now. And in MUFON, they have been from the beginning.
They are the largest civilian investigative group in the world. We have chapters around the world. We collect data from around the world. So we're aware of what is happening. MUFON is considered to be highly credible, scientifically oriented, and we make that information available to the public through MUFON's website and through the MUFON journal that is available to anyone who wants to subscribe.
One of the things that I loved about MUFON is that MUFON was trying to get educated people to build credibility around the research. I mean, we are a grassroots effort. Again, we all, bring to the table whatever expertise we have, and we try, we banded together to create a credible protocol for investigation. I mean, it's an organization that trains people. It's extensive training. The field investigation manual is at least an inch thick, for people to give you a visual. I mean, you have to study, you have to learn vectoring, just like what pilots learn. You have to be able to be educated on at least estimating distances, altitude. There's protocols that, how you can have stationary objects to help you with that. So there's a quite extensive, education process, which I loved.
we need science involved. These people are having experiences, but why and how? There's more to it than just saying, well, we don't believe you or we don't understand. We need to measure that. It's time that we organize more here in the Midwest, because if you're going to look into UFOs, you can't have somebody in New York or California or Arizona telling you when it's time to go look for a UFO. It's happening right in the grassroots area.
Yeah.
MUFON was born.
You called it the Midwest UFO Network.
Called the Midwest UFO Network.
And then eventually you changed it to Mutual.
We thought, well, Midwest is a big enough bite. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so that went on a couple of 3 years, and people in Europe and other places said, you guys are doing something. We want to join. So, well, how do you do that? We tell them, you belong from Timbuktu to Midwest UFO Network. And it was very simple. We could just keep the same acronym and change it to Mutual. We mutually work together everywhere as a team.
We're the oldest and largest organization on the planet. 50 years ago we started that. We are scientifically, very professionally detailing all these characteristics of experiencers, of the craft themselves, the sightings, the electromagnetic effects, all of that stuff.
They have MUFON University, where you can actually go on and take classes in astronomy and, basic education. The CMS has been updated. We have all these wonderful now automated case forms. We all used to have paper stuff. Can you imagine that? There was no way to disseminate the information. Now with the CMS, all of the investigators, we put our information into a central database and we can access everybody's research. I have a case here with a triangular craft. I can actually do a search for triangular craft.
And I'm just so grateful that they recognize the need to get this information out to young people and to families. That's the thing. Older people need to learn this information too. It's just starting to get out there. Now we've come so far in 20 years, 22 years, from the ridicule and the snickering and the jokes and the discrediting. Okay, discredit the messenger so people won't listen to the message. That's been the call card. And now it's really come full circle. Now that the military let the cat out of the bag just recently, and now Navy pilots are coming forward and making people, and I hope that my own coming forward help the governor to come forward.
Our purpose is to educate the public and promote research, and from that, I see it as more and more people now are also talking about consciousness. And that's what's really exciting, because, we get 800 to 1,000 cases a month from around the world. So this is happening everywhere, and more people are coming out, and you're starting to see it more go in that direction of the understanding of consciousness is a huge part. So it's really exciting.
I'm the director of MUFON's Experiencer Research Team. We have 30 people who communicate with experiencers on a day-to-day basis, just in a non-judgmental and supportive manner, because so many people have tried to tell their friends, their family, and they're laughed at, they're criticized, they're told to see a psychiatrist, they're asked, what have you been drinking? And it's very hurtful. And people have to work through that. They have to have a kind, non-judgmental person that can begin that process with them.
You've got the heart to help people, and you are interested in the consciousness of all of this, but there's also science to back it up. Wherever possible, you're trying to get proof. You're trying to log the facts. You're not throwing out the science. A lot of people, it's either or. Some people are so nuts and bolts. I'm like, well, let's bring consciousness back into it, because it obviously plays a role. I feel like MUFON blends the two.
We do. There's even science and religion. I know people think those are opposite ends of the same, but frankly, they're both based on observation, and religious observations. If you raise someone from the dead, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Well, there's physics behind that. It's called operating in higher dimensions. So if you have to be operating in higher dimensions, but you can do it. Now, we don't see it because we're living in a three-dimensional world, and to us everything's solid and you bang on it, but yet this table here is basically empty space from what we know.
I should be able to put my hand right through
You
it.
should be.
And I have tried, and it's not working, but
One day you will be able
I'm
to.
going to keep trying.
Jan Harzan is a wonderful executive director very bright, background in engineering, worked at IBM, and had his own UFO sighting with his brother when he was a child. So he knows that it's real too. And he's just a delightful, open kind of person. So you couldn't ask for a better person to represent the Mutual UFO Network.
What do you hope the future of MUFON is?
This is what I hope. 2 weeks ago, I took out 3 interns, that young men in their 20s. Pilot, one of the pilots is actually my grandson. I was so proud of him. He's been flying since he was 16, and he was with a senior pilot, and the senior pilot had him land the aircraft in really adverse conditions, and he did a great job. And so I look at all these young people that are really highly trained. He brought 2 of his friends. One's an engineer, and these young men, they were awesome. All of us older boots on the ground investigators go, oh my God, who's going to take our place? We're so passionate. We want the work to continue. And what I hope is young men, young women with those skill sets and curiosity will come in behind us. Let us train you with what we know, and you take it to the next level, which they will. So that's what I hope, because these young men, they just had a great time. I trained them on all the equipment. They were very astute, serious. They learned things quickly. And we went to a site and disseminated, and they just had a great time. So I see the enthusiasm of young people. So I hope we can actually have a lot of young people come to MUFON and join the fun.
Well, I think the future of MUFON is very bright right now, because the door is open to all kind of change. The world's changing scientifically. The world's changing religiously. Everything that comes along. And the good part about MUFON is we have people from all backgrounds, all education levels, all types of education, all religions, all colors, everything. And MUFON, we rate women equality to men from the very beginning.
Where do you hope to see MUFON headed in the future? What do the next 50 years look like?
Well, I think we're already on that journey. I mean, with the announcement back in December of 2017, I think disclosure has happened. People are now looking for confirmation. But the fact of the matter is most of us are already over the Kubler-Ross grieving curve. We're past denial, we're past anger, we're past depression and bargaining. We're down into acceptance. And we have to bring the rest of the world along that way. Because a lot of the public, when I speak publicly, I'll always ask the question, how many people think somewhere far out in the universe there might be other intelligent life like ourselves? And 100% of hands go up. Because with all the exoplanet stuff, all the stuff we've been told the last few years, now going back 20 years, it would have been a half the room. But today, 100% of the hands go up. So then I ask the second question, which is, how many of you think that at some time in the past or currently that life has visited our planet? And only half of the hands go up. So that's the part we got to work on, right? Because half the people believe they're already here, which they are, and the other half are still saying, well, I don't know if I believe that. I don't see any evidence to that effect. Well, we've got tons of evidence for them. So what MUFON is doing is providing a couple of these. One is a place for people to safely report what they experience, whether it be a UFO sighting, an abduction experience, an entity encounter, and also a place to create the conversation for people to carry on. And I think we're the people you can talk to, bring in, and help do it. I think it's educating the public. I see that's really what our mission is for the next 50 years, is just to continue to do investigations, continue to do research, but basically educate the public. And this has to be done in a thoughtful way that doesn't scare the public. And I don't believe it to be a threat. I know our military looks at things as a threat. That's their job. We pay them to observe things and observe it as a threat. Their job is to protect us from other things. So you have to look at it as a threat. But honestly, the vast majority of these sightings and reports we get from people and our conversations with the witnesses and the experiencers is overwhelmingly positive. And I think that's one thing we need to remember. It might have to do with us learning how to grow and raise our consciousness and move into the next phase of humanity, which I'm excited to bring about.
As soon as you slam the door and said, that's all there is, I know everything, you might as well put it in the closet and go home, We don't know everything.
No.
Just wait till tomorrow. And MUFON will make discoveries tomorrow.
I hope you enjoyed that closer look at MUFON. If you've had a sighting or encounter, definitely visit MUFON.com and get more information. And please consider supporting them so we can keep them going for another 50 years at least. As I mentioned at the beginning, I also wanted to honor Stanton Friedman in this episode. We wouldn't be where we are without Stanton today, definitely. We now have things like Ancient Aliens, UFO Hunters, all these UFO conferences, you name it. But honestly, when Stanton first started speaking out on the subject, he really had to fight to be taken seriously. He was very brave and certainly ahead of his time. Many of you know all about Stanton. For anyone who doesn't, I'll just give you some quick background here. He was an early civilian investigator of the famous Roswell crash that happened in 1947. He was a nuclear physicist. He researched and fact-checked Majestic 12, Project Blue Book. The list goes on and on. He was meticulous in his research, had very high standards. He was actually born July 29th, 1934 in New Jersey. His grandparents came to the U.S. from Eastern Europe. He went to Linden High School in Linden, New Jersey, and was valedictorian of his class at the age of 16. He was on the debate team, which obviously really helped set him up for a life of looking at both sides of the story and preparing your argument. I think getting the facts straight meant everything to Stanton. He attended Rutgers University, then the University of Chicago. He earned his master's degree in physics in 1956. He was classmates with Carl Sagan, which is very interesting in those years, although I think they went on to not see eye to eye on the UFO phenomenon. In 1958, he was hired as a nuclear physicist in General Electric's Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department. He also worked for General Motors, Westinghouse, McDonnell Douglas. And it was during that time that he became really interested in UFOs, including really diving into Project Blue Book and getting more interested in how our government and Air Force were not giving us all the facts about UFOs. In 1970, he left being a full-time physicist, left that behind, and became fully committed to UFO research and investigation, and was passionately pursuing the truth right to the end. You could often hear him on Coast to Coast, Larry King. He lectured all around the world at conferences and colleges. I only had the pleasure of meeting him once. He was very kind to me. I wish I had more time to talk to him. But although I didn't personally know him well, I had the chance to catch up with some people who did. So we're going to hear from them now. In order of appearance, for those not watching on YouTube, some of the same faces from the first part of this episode: John Schuessler, Angelia Sheer, Dr. Lynne Kitei, Kathleen Marden. She and Stanton were actually very dear friends, and they worked on 3 books together: Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, Science Was Wrong, and the first book they worked on together was Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Interesting side note, Kathleen Marden is actually the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, of course one of the most famous abduction cases in history. We also have Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle-Wright, a dear friend of mine. James Fox, filmmaker, who's really focused on the UFO phenomenon. In fact, he has a movie coming out called Phenomenon early next year. He was a dear friend of Stanton's, and you'd often see them together on Larry King. All right, without further ado, let's honor Stanton Friedman.
I met Stan the first time in 1971. After we formed MUFON, my little group in the St. Louis area decided to host the second symposium. And that was in St. Louis, Missouri in 1971. And Stan was one of our leading speakers. That was because then he was already recognized as a nuclear physicist, as a guy that was not afraid to talk about UFOs, no matter what you said or called him. And he had a great heart. And I got to know him real well during the symposium. In fact, to the point I even took him to the airport afterwards, that sort of thing. And from then on, we were always friends. We exchanged information constantly. And he's been one of the leading speakers at MUFON symposiums over the years. And he always had a strong message, always had wonderful thoughts about what you do and how important it is. And in the later years, he worked with Kathleen Marden on abductions and that sort of thing. Again, moving it all as to the field of science and technology and humanism as well. And he was a gentle guy. He was a good guy. You couldn't help but like him. you couldn't help but feel a little bit dumb at times because he knew so much about physics and the like.
Well, Stanton was a nuclear physicist, as you know, and so he was a real scientist. He also had a genius IQ, and that helped as well. He was a master debater. He was the original civilian investigator of the Roswell crash. He did so many things.
Stanton Friedman and I, we did some interesting work probably 20 years ago. I'm aging myself here. But my father did research when I was very young, and he actually had petitioned the government for freedom of information on documents. And I have these cases of actual documents typed on a typewriter. You can tell there's carbon paper, that the government released to him. And something, you learn something. This is what I learned from Stan Friedman. He was such a great investigator. He said, "Ange, will you bring those documents?" And I said, "Well, sure. They really don't say a lot." He goes, "No, that's not the point." He said, "We actually can match the typeset." Because some of the older typewriters where they disseminated had certain characters that were bent, or there were markers. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I was a young investigator. I thought, I learned those kind of investigative techniques because they could validate a lot of the documents from the typeset. Well, he was one of the first, highly educated. He was a nuclear physicist. And, a lot of those people back then, they would be fired if they came forward. And, I just love Stan. He was like a bulldog. You know what I mean? He was smart and educated, and he was kind of a lot of us, our heroes, because he had the courage to come forward and, hold his ground and say, no, this is real, and here are the facts, and I'm going to present them to you. And so Stan was great. He was a mentor to a lot of us.
Stan really stood above the rest. I mean, coming from a scientific background myself, I know how difficult it is to make that choice to come forward, how precarious it is. And he's been out there a lot. He was out there a lot longer than myself. And a very sweet, kind man, besides being extremely knowledgeable about the topic. And that's really important. I mean, not only credible people coming forward from the general public, but also scientists actually looking at the data. And there's a lot happening behind closed doors, but coming forward to share what they know and really studying this in a credible and professional way so we can move forward. So Stan, stood above the rest, and the fact that he was a physicist, a nuclear physicist, but came with that background and then was kind enough to share it with all of us and raise awareness of the facts of the data. Yeah. The data speaks for itself.
He contributed so much to our scientific knowledge in this field. He was a meticulous researcher. As a scientist and as a rocket scientist, he was a good representative because the public believed what he said.
Be a scientist and to think like a scientist and to have that amazing perspective and wade into a field of colleagues and start talking about something that they don't want to accept. To have such a backbone that it doesn't matter what your colleagues say. I don't know what else to call it, backbone.
He wanted to live to be 89 like his parents. He passed away shortly before his 85th birthday.
He was a beacon of greatness. I'll give you an example. He called me. I cried actually when he passed. He called me like a couple of years ago, and he's like, "Hey James, I came across this show you did where you were on with the skeptic, with Larry King and the skeptic guy." He goes, "Can you get me a copy of that?" And I said, "Well, sure, And he's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what are you up to, Stan?" And he goes, "Well, I got a debate with this guy in a year and a half, and I just want to." So what he was doing was he was preparing for a debate a year and a half in advance. He was digging up everything this guy had ever said and logging it and studying it and composing an intelligent, rational, accurate response to everything this guy has ever said in the history of his appearances. that greatness doesn't just come. This guy worked his tail off to make that happen.
Boy, and to me, working together for 14 years, doing archival research, writing 3 books together, so much of that, and becoming very good friends. I really miss him, and I just have an empty chair.
His loss was a major loss to the world, literally, not just to MUFON, but to everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, I hope you'll consider subscribing, and please tell your friends. Until next time, this is Katie Cook reminding you to keep your eyes, heart, and mind wide open.